Well, welcome tonight. I'm so glad that each of you chose to show up tonight. My name is Kelsey Rutledge, and I am the Young Adults Pastor at Reach Church. And tonight we are kicking off Mental Health Awareness Month with this topic of mental health and faith. So there we go. I was going to say something else, but then I forgot because my computer's not open, so watch me fidget over here. But anyway, we are really excited about this conversation and this night. We know that Aaron and Josh are going to share a little about themselves and their backgrounds, but while they are licensed and trained therapists, I also want us all to take everything they say with a grain of salt. They are not the end-all, be-all, and we are all continuing on like the road of discovery, and there's so much more we know, and if any of us in the room have navigated any sort of mental health, there's so much that we don't know, and even as we engage on this topic, we're like, oh my gosh, there's so much more I didn't know. And so, I just want us to be open-minded as we enter these conversations. Let us be lifelong learners as we are in these conversations. And I know for some of us, maybe you're not necessarily wrestling with like something in the mental health or just like for you personally. You might encounter that in the future, or you might have a friend who is struggling with that. And so I think this is just a really encouraging conversation for us as ambassadors of Christ to be able to be with people in the trenches of these conversations. And so maybe if you're like, I don't know how this is going to apply for me, maybe it's not about you. Maybe it's just for us to be able to enter into this conversation and have awareness for other people in our life. And so with that being said, we have three things. One is while we have some questions, we do have a time at the end for texting in questions. And so you'll see a website, it's called Slido. You can go to that website, there's a specific number that you'll type in, and you can text anonymous questions. And the most voted questions will come to the top and we'll see them. So at the end of the night, we'll go over those questions. We also will have resources. So if you got our newsletter last month, we had so many resources, and we have a lot of resources coming at the end of this month. And so the three of us have really taken time to curate podcasts, book recommendations, free courses, counseling suggestions, all of that. And so we really want this to be something that blesses our community, and that this can be a great first step into not just having it be here, but maybe you send that resource list to somebody else that needs it. And then lastly, at the end of the night, we will have a prayer team behind the stage. So you can either go that way or that way behind the stage at the end of the night. Post announcements. We have a prayer team that is ready to pray for you, or maybe you have a loved one in your life that you would like to stand in their place and contend for them in prayer. We just want to invite that at the end of the night. So with that being said, we are going to hand it off to our wonderful panelists, Aaron and Loy, and they are going to tell us a little bit about themselves. So give it a hand up for Aaron and Loy.
Hi, everyone. My name is Erin, and I am the women's pastor at Reach. I am a former licensed women's trauma therapist. I am from Arizona. Anybody like the sun that we've had? There we go. Yeah, woohoo. But I currently am moving to the Bridal Trails neighborhood up here in Kirkland, so very excited about that. Yeah, I'm married. We just celebrated 17 years last Friday, which feels weird because I feel like I am not old enough to have been married for 17 years, but that's okay. And we also have a 13-year-old daughter and an 11-year-old son. And so mental health is near and dear to my heart. I have always said that helpers have been helped usually, or helpers have needed help. And so I think part of my story has been living in a home with an addict, having abuse in my background, and things like that. And that really led me to a space where I felt like the Lord was allowing me to hold that space for other women specifically, but other people just in my career. So that is a little bit about me.
Love it. I'm excited to disagree with Aaron tonight. We were told that the best panels here have been the ones that had disagreements. And so I'm just going to look for every opportunity to just disagree strongly with Aaron, which is probably not going to happen. But so I'm Josh. I'm the care pastor at Reach. I've been a therapist for about 15 years. I've been a supervisor for about 10. And I live up in Snohomish, north side. I don't know, I doubt anyone's here from Snohomish, but I'm from the farmlands of Snohomish. Let's go. There's cows right outside my door. That's not a joke. There's cows right there. And so anyway, I have 4 kids. I love the field of counseling. I was initially trained as a biblical counselor. There were some good things that came out of that and some pretty ugly things that came out of that. I'm very well versed in spiritual abuse as well, both as someone who used to come from a camp that was pretty spiritually abusive to someone who has received a lot in some pretty intense circumstances, my wife and I both. So I'm pretty passionate about that too, and about how the church can be really redemptive away from some of those harmful things. So, and then to be honest, I'm doing the best here in my late 30s. I'm doing the best therapy I've done in my life, which just means I'm constantly shook by how much therapy is continually showing me that I did not realize about myself, and how my story shows up all the time in my marriage and my parenting. My wife and I are constantly shocked. Can you believe we're just now learning this? The things that are coming out of both of our counseling experiences. So yeah, I've been through quite a bit. Everything from, hey, I'm here for counseling because I think I've wrecked my life. That's how I started in counseling about 10 to 15 years ago, to now being like, oh, I had no idea how my family dynamics are currently hugely impacting my marriage, which is what I'm currently slowly unpacking. So I'm still a therapy story. Thank God for therapy in my life, and it's been a blessing. So.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. All right, so we are going to kick it off with our first question, and that is, how would you define mental health, and what misconceptions have you heard about mental health?
Josh, were you going to talk about defining mental health?
I mean, yeah, I can totally. Sure. So mental health, you guys, that you've heard that term. The term is a little bit of a junk drawer term, but it just means flourishing, right? Human flourishing. And this is where, as Christians, I feel like we really should and do care about this, right? Just what does it mean to be healthy? What does it mean to flourish in life? What does it mean to be whole? We know that parts of ourselves, the parts of ourselves we dislike the most painful parts of ourselves, are things we actually tend to cut off from ourselves. As Christians, these tend to be the places we carry the most shame. We don't want to think about, feel those things, remember those memories. And so for all of us, even the ways we act today, all have context. Whatever you did today, however you reacted, whatever words came out, whatever way you related to your friends, whatever anger you saw or sadness, it comes from your story. And what happens is we get stuck. We really get stuck in the ways we've learned to survive, which have helped us along this far. So the field of mental health counseling, they're committed to you in many different camps, in many different definitions. How can people get better? How can people flourish? And of course, we care about that as Christians, because I actually think that's God's department, right? God cares about you, your flourishing. I believe he's written your story, and then he wants redemption, wants healing in every part of our lives. So mental health is kind of more of a term from the field of counseling and psychology, but as Christians, it's full of loaded meaning that Jesus speaks to as well. So I think it's for both.
Yeah, and I think some of the misconceptions are that you have to be in crisis to go to therapy, or you have to have a diagnosis of some sort to go to therapy. And both of those things, therapy is very, very helpful for. But I think that, using this very loosely, tongue-in-cheek, like a good regular life people, we go to therapy. And I used to use this analogy with clients often, where we're like cars, and if we have major accident or something like that kind of wrecks us, we go to a repair shop to have that major work done. But in order for a car to run well, and to run well for the long term, we need tune-ups, we need oil changes, all of those things. And the same is for our mental health, that it's both for those spaces of major work needing to be done, major healing needing to be done, as well as that like ongoing tune-ups that are really great for the continued, like Josh was saying, the continued growth and flourishing of us. So I think I used to joke that like I wish I could give everybody like counseling gift certificates for Christmas, because I was like, everyone should just go to therapy, because it really brings you to a space where you can understand yourself more deeply, and that no one is outside of struggle. Us, you guys, anybody you run into at the grocery store or in your workplaces or anything, we've all walked through struggle. And because of that, therapy is just a really wonderful place. Counseling is a really wonderful place where we can talk through that with somebody who is trained and who is sitting with us specifically to help us to know ourselves better and to heal in those places.
And just out of curiosity, I would love to see like a show of hands on this. And if you don't feel comfortable, that's okay. But how many of us either like grew up in homes where counseling was a taboo subject, it was not talked about at all, or that it was talked about? So show of hands of like, it was a taboo subject. We did not talk about it in our homes, right? Yeah, super, super common. And then how about if that was a common topic in your home? Wow, that's awesome. Honestly, that kind of feels 50-50, which I'm a little bit surprised by. But even that's a misconception in and of itself. And I'm kind of curious about this. There's a misconception that, do you see an only Christian counselor or can you see a secular counselor? What's kind of the pros and cons of that?
Is this where we have our disagreement, Josh?
I hope so. Oh my gosh. I hope you get so angry.
We'll repair well up here.
I love
Counseling will be in session.
Yeah. It's I really believe that all healing is God's healing, and I believe I come from there's a whole spectrum of camps in Christian counseling, how Christians have responded to see themselves in relation to the world of psychology. And I would consider myself a Christian psychologist, which just means I believe God created you for a specific type of flourishing that we're still learning about. We know that Jesus is the answer to our wounds, but we're still discovering the unique brokenness that is us. And so I believe that as things emerge in our field, like neuroscience right now is incredible. Neuroscience is incredible. Trauma around neuroscience, how memories get stored in your body, how the 8-year-old self is present in the moments when you feel the things that you felt as an 8-year-old, when the class laughed at your answer, and then something happens in a setting like this, and they heard me, she asked you to raise your hand, and you feel, right? That 8-year-old self, those 8-year-old feelings, they're actually there. They come, that part of your brain comes back on, right? So the things that we're learning reveal our unique brokenness. I believe that in a lot of secular therapies, just meaning that they're not uniquely Christian, there's really good healing work happening. And I think they're wonderful, but I also think I believe that. I believe that those are really great works. Lifespan integration, incredible. Childhood stuff right now, ways to heal from memories in your childhood that you can't even touch. Incredible stuff coming out of camps that are not Christian, but also I'm of the unique position that that plus Jesus is an awesome combination, right? Lifespan integration goes into your old memories, has you, this is really unique, has you imagine and speak to your younger self in that moment, right? So I've sat with a therapist who's doing this with someone, I'm not gonna go long, I promise. And she was in this horrible memory, right, where she was with her stepmom that she wished was her mom. She wished she had love from her stepmom, she didn't. And her stepmom was incredibly cruel to her and would hurt her. And when she was initially asked if she was abused, she said no. And then the stories just started coming out as she was in therapy. Anyway, one of her memories was literally being fed soap with her mouth underneath the sink and she couldn't breathe by her stepmom. Really cruel memory. And so lifespan integration brings people to horrible memories of their childhood and invites their adult self into the memory, has their adult self ask what their needs are, has their adult self respond to those needs, which means you might be rescuing yourself out of that. You might be telling the child yourself as an 8-year-old, what you should have heard in those moments, right? Really healing, beautiful stuff. And people release and they feel unstuck from these huge, heavy, just awful memories. And then now there's stuff emerging plus Jesus, right? So that exact formula plus where's Jesus in this? What would it be like if Jesus were to rescue you from this moment? What did this little girl need to hear from Jesus? What does he say about her? Okay, come back to the present. What does Jesus say about you right now? Right? Just really beautiful things that aren't just integrating people, but giving them the word of God, which is their identity as a child of God. So I believe in both. I think they're both good. I'm like, secular therapies can be good, plus Jesus even better. So
we're not disagreeing. You're not going to see a fight.
Yet.
I would say that absolutely, that considering the worldview that the person that's walking you through some of those really vulnerable places is really important, because I think that even the subtle ways that we are encouraged, that we're spoken to, and those kinds of things, when they come from a worldview that's not aligning with your faith perspective, your faith beliefs, have the potential to be those tiny, the story about like when an airplane's off 1 degree, it eventually is off by a lot in the long run. And so I think that being really mindful of the foundation is important.
Yeah. And as you were talking a lot about childhood, there's this kind of, again, a misconception that is like, why do I have to constantly look at the past? Why do I have to observe my childhood? Do I really need to consider my past in order to grow today? Why is mental health so focused on my childhood?
Yeah, I love that. I feel like people are actually really scared of this question. Don't want to talk about our childhoods, don't want to touch our childhoods. Or want to believe that I'm making free decisions away from my childhood. I'm not really affected by that. But the reality is that any behavior, like I said, any language, if you were to ask yourself, let's just talk about your relationships. If you were to take the people closest to you and you were to ask them to write down, this would be a very brave exercise, by the way, what's it like to be in relationship with me? On a half sheet of paper, just a half sheet, the things written down there, I want to tell you, are not random. They are there for a reason. They're because of where you come from, and they're formed from the place that your brain learned how to do relationships, and that's from your home. That's from your caregivers. That's from your mom and dad, the people that taught your brain how to relate to each other. And so I'm of the belief, absolutely, that childhood and the connections that come out of that are huge, and that we often are not even aware of what came out of that. But getting that, if you like, I'll just take an example. Like for me, I'm learning right now, let's just talk about distress. Your parents, I believe every child was meant to have parents, caregivers, who could be attuned to their emotions, which meant they would be able to see what's going on in you. When your face fell, when you showed sadness, when you were panicked, when you were distressed, did you have caregivers that recognized and noticed when your heart was hurt? That's just attunement. That's huge, because that's the only way that we ourselves know how to become attuned to our own emotions, is people pointing it out and helping us see it. Babies don't know, kids don't know what they're experiencing. They need you as a parent to show and name them and see it. So if you're an adult now and you have a really hard time naming what your emotion is, it could be you came from a home that really didn't talk about emotions. Maybe didn't attune to emotions well, right? And then even distress. How did your parents deal with your negative emotions? Could your parents, when you showed anger, when you showed sadness, when you showed panic, when you showed fear, pursue your heart with curiosity and kindness? Or was their distress even bigger, right? Were they out of regulation because of your dysregulation, right? That was my home, right? My dad would explode, okay? And I love my dad, but if I was upset, he was 10 times more upset, okay? And so I learned over time that for me, I couldn't go there. If I show my distress to him, it is not going to go well for me. It's going to be dismissed, which is a form of rejection. It's actually painful. So now in marriage, when my wife's like, why do you like never have needs? Like, you seem like you're always fine, and she'll have moments of sadness. She'll show me her sadness. She'll show me her heartache. She'll tell me when she feels lonely. She'll be like, do you like me even, right? She'll tell me when she's feeling bad things. And for me, I'm not showing her those things. And I'm only now making connections like, oh yeah, it's because I had to learn. I had to learn because I wouldn't put my needs out there because they'd be dismissed. Man, so I've had to name, and when you can name it, that's just what I want to say at the end here, when you can name the connections you've made to your own story, you actually get to tell the people around you, this is why. You get to tell yourself, first of all. I believe you cannot change what you cannot name. But if you can name, you can change it. So now when I see my heart disconnecting, like I feel this way, I don't want to show that. Definitely don't want to let my wife know I'm angry right now. I can resist that and say, I know what that is. That's from my story. That's because I didn't want my needs to be dismissed by my dad, right? So I just to say, when you name it, you can actually enter into your adult life, your relationships. You can change those things. You can start to even move against these natural ways you've been formed.
So it's all interconnected.
All of it.
All of it. Kind of on that topic of distress, anxiety, stress, burnout, they've become very prevalent in our culture. And I'm sure it's not new, but it feels heightened. What do you believe is the cause of this? And what are some practical ways to work through anxiety, stress, and burnout?
I feel like you should talk now. I talked for a while.
It's fine. It's okay. I think when I think of practical ways that we can deal with that, I'll let you speak to the aspect of burnout. But I think when I think of my own story in practical ways, I am if you follow Enneagram, I'm an Enneagram 1, type A. I'm like, I took the Enneagram quiz and I was 97% 1. So I'm like the onest one you'll ever meet. And so very particular person, very perfectionism, like those kinds of things have been the struggles for me. And so when it came to the practicalities of my own mental health journey, growing up in the home that I grew up in, anxiety was very high, but not on the outside. Anxiety was what fueled my perfectionism and what fueled my performance. And so I had to learn, and this was in therapy as well as just reading and getting to know sort of what kinds of resources were out there. I came to understand that slowness was the antidote to my anxiety, that stillness was the antidote to my anxiety. And so lots of things like practicing mindfulness, and that it doesn't have to be complicated. It can really be mindfulness in this moment. As I'm listening to this 20s and 30s panel, I'm noticing what my body feels. I'm noticing how I'm breathing. I'm noticing the thoughts that are going through my mind, my tendency to want to check my phone or something like that. So mindfulness was kind of the beginning way of me going, okay, well, what do I feel? If I'm on hyperdrive all the time and anxiety is the only thing that I'm feeling, or the only thing that I'm noticing, how do I practically walk through this? And it was really learning to see and recognize all of the other emotions that I felt, because we have more than just one. And so mindfulness was one of those things. And I will say too, anything that I name, this is not like prescriptive at all, but is just kind of some ideas as I'm throwing out there. Running was one thing for me too. Just pounding the pavement with my feet, going on runs. I've said before, like, running was a part of kind of saving me. It was a space that I could regulate and a space that I could kind of just feel all the feelings. And it was okay that I was the weird crying lady running down the street. Like, I'm not joking. I would have sobbing sessions as I'm running. And I'm just like, people will either think I'm sweating or that I'm upset that my body hurts as I'm running, but they have no idea what's going on for me. So that felt really safe. But being outdoors, I also use things like Lectio 365 is an amazing app that kind of brings mindfulness in with Lectio Divina and that sort of thing. But really breath practice and being really still with myself was one of the ways that I really learned to be present to what was going on with me. And from there, I could learn what I needed. Because if I was on 100 miles an hour and anxiety was the only thing that I was feeling, and I just was shutting it down and using that energy to propel myself forward, I was just not aware of me. I didn't know me very well. And so slowing down was scary work because I had to come to face to those things that were painful. But it was beautiful work because it allowed me space to see all of myself, which I came to know things I like about myself and that sort of thing. But I was wondering if in this moment, would it be cool if we did, I think it would be really neat if we just practice breath together. Sometimes when we think of breath practice, we can think, oh, just taking a deep breath, like I'm really upset, like that's not going to do anything. But there's actual studies that show the difference that breathing can make in our bodies. Lowering our stress hormones and things like that, and allowing us to be really present. So
you should share that study too.
The study,
we were talking about it.
Yeah,
earlier.
totally.
I just thought it was fascinating.
It's really cool. I can send it to you. But it's the National Institute of Health. They did a study on. Basically had a group of people who did breath practice and a group of people who didn't. Kind of the easiest study ever. Control group and the breathers. And for 6 weeks, the people who did breath practice, they practiced it daily. And then they tracked sort of the actual cortisol levels in people's bodies. And at the end of the study, the people who did the breath practice, and if you don't know what cortisol is, it's the stress like hormone that kind of rises when we feel really anxious, and there's more to it, but that's kind of the gist. And at the end of this study, the people who had the breath practice had 60% lower cortisol levels than the people who didn't. And so it's just really wild to see like just how God has built our bodies to have resources, and that he's breathed that life into us. And so I think that just even aligning ourselves with that one resource that we have in our bodies can do so much for us when we're managing anxiety, depression, high levels of stress, and all of those kinds of things. So I think it would be really great if even we practice it right now. You could see how simple it is. And so if you feel comfortable closing your eyes, you can go ahead and do that. If closing your eyes is hard, you can also lower your gaze to the floor. We just want to minimize distractions. And you can ground your feet to the ground. You just want to get in a really comfortable position. And I just invite you to take a deep breath with me. There's 4 square breathing. So you just breathe in for 4 counts, and you hold it for 4 counts, and you breathe out for 4 counts, and you hold that for 4 counts. So I'll direct us, but go ahead and take a deep breath in, and I'll count. 1, 2, 3, 4, and hold. 1, 2, 3, 4, and out. 1, 2, 3, 4, and hold. 1, 2, 3, and we'll do that again, and I won't count, but go in and hold and out and hold. One more time, in, hold, and out, and hold. And you can go ahead and return to normal breathing. That was very short. But I just encourage you to do that until you notice your body calm. There's no magic number. Some moments might take less, and some moments may take longer. You can do it when you're trying to fall asleep. You can do it when you wake up to center yourself. But those are just some practical ways that I have used personally. But those aren't the only ways. So, yeah.
I love that. So practical. I mean, even too, just like really quickly naming it, you said practicing mindfulness, running, Lectio 365 app, breath work. Is there any like just quick hitters that you would also add to that?
I mean, if you guys are in church on Sunday, like Sabbath being a big one, just some point in your schedule where you actually stop doing the same stuff all the time. Because our whole society, you know, the whole our whole society is built on keeping you distracted, giving you dopamine hits, and even your social media cycle, news cycle is actually built on creating reactions in you, right? If they can get you to come back and they can get you to get a dopamine hit, which by the way, that can be anger too, right? Even outrage gives people something that causes them to come back. So the whole industry is built on exploiting a human vulnerability within all of us. That actually leads to a high state of unrest. And you guys know all the studies, including the Major Time study that was just like social media equals unhappiness, right? And so I just think there's a lot within our worlds that just says more, you know, and we are very prone to say yes, you know, or be distracted, or to stay in a state of almost just frazzledness. And so I just think anxiety is actually, you know, numbers are through the roof. And I think a lot of it is because we just have a different world. We have different stuff in front of us. We have more information than ever, and we have to deal with it. So turning off your phone, holy man, that's huge. You can turn off your phone for 6 hours. I mean, just watch your body release itself, because your brain is definitely in a different state when it's off. And so yeah, I think that's big. It's just practicing Sabbath, practicing rest, stopping scrolling. Don't scroll during your rest. Go ahead and scroll. Do it. Death scroll all the time if you want to, you know, but don't do it when you're resting, because you won't achieve rest then. So.
Yeah, that's so good. Really quickly, could you just, in your own words, kind of define the difference between biblical rest and self-care?
Yeah, it's so good. I think God cares about our self-care, like big time. I think it's in the scriptures too. I think Elijah is the perfect example of depression. He was despaired to the point of wanting to take his life, actually asking God to kill him, and God responds by saying, "I think you need food," and literally feeds him with birds. And
You need a quick snack and a nap.
Right, he needed a snack, and that's what happens. That's literally what happens, But also, I just think God cares about your body. God created your body. Your experience of God is embodied. It is your body. We know from biblical theology, it's not just that you have a body, you are a body, right? And that body is going to be with you and be with Jesus at the end. So he cares about your body. And I think a lot of times people see that as two separate things, right? Like, the fitness world and the health world. Oh, but here I go to church, It's like, well, God wants us to care for our body. That is what he created to do well with and to steward well. So I think there's that. I also think that there's a whole wellness movement that's like, you need to figure out how to perfectly care for yourself, even if that means screwing everyone else, it really is like create your own Zen and say no to anything that doesn't drive with that, do your own truth kind of thing. I just got to do my own thing. So, but I think that the truth is that God wants us to be well, but encourages us in our wellness to actually become others focused, right? So for Reach, I don't want Reach to become a place that's obsessed with wellness, just like you create, even Sabbath can become that, like my Zen, my wellness. It's meant to be, we rest, and it makes us more worshipful. It makes us love God more. It makes us actually be able to offer more to other people, to be generous without doing it from a place of being totally depleted. And so I think that's a uniquely Christian thing that is not wellness. It's like, oh, I feel good. Man, I should lay down my life for other people. That's not something that the wellness movement is doing. Like, yeah, go sacrifice for others, but Jesus invites us to that. And so I think that that's a difference for sure. Yeah.
When you think of the growing use of the word trauma, does everyone really have trauma to work through on their mental health journey?
That's such a good question, because I think that we can kind of shy away from that word because it feels like a buzzword. I think, when people say, oh, I'm triggered, things like that can cause us to sort of dismiss it entirely. And I think that does a really big disservice to the fact that there are real traumas. I think the growing use of the word trauma can actually be really good because we are recognizing aspects of our story. I would often tell clients that trauma, they'd be like, what is trauma? And then I need to decide if that's what I have. And I was like, well, okay. And what if it's just any moment that you felt overwhelmed, that you could not make a choice? Your sense of choice was taken from you. What if that's what trauma is for you? And that broadens the definition so wide. And so I think that kind of acknowledging just in society for each of us that a lot of us have something that falls into that camp. A lot of us have situations where we have been overwhelmed to the point of being so massively stressed that our bodies kind of shut down, and our choice has been taken from us. And that can look like a lot of different things. There's big T traumas, and so that would be something like a massive world event like the war in Ukraine, or a tsunami, or earthquake, or something like that. And then we have little T traumas that I think go under the radar, that are harder for us to acknowledge because they don't feel like those earth-shattering moments. I wasn't in an earthquake, but my mom made a comment on my body every day. I wasn't in a tsunami, but my dad used to make threatening gestures towards me often. Those are traumatic things. I had a boss who berated me in front of all of my fellow coworkers. That's traumatic. When we experience things like that, I think it's important to acknowledge that there are little T, and I don't say the word little to belittle it, but just to say that oftentimes some of these really traumatic experiences that we do have don't get validated because it's like, oh, well, your boss was just a jerk, so don't worry about it. Or like, body positivity, so ignore what your mom said. And that's actually really dismissive, and it's dismissive to what your experience is. And at the end of the day, I would often tell my clients that it's not necessarily important that you name that right now. If that does not feel accessible to you, that you call that event traumatic, what would it be like to just acknowledge that you went through a significant event that has stuck with you this long, has stayed with you your entire life? I think that one of the analogies that I would often use too is like, yes, if you break your arm or your leg gets cut off or something like that, that we can kind of obviously say that's like a big trauma on your body. But I don't know if any of you have ever heard this phrase before, but like death by 1,000 paper cuts. A paper cut is something that's like, oh, ouch, that's inconvenient. But if you had 1,000 paper cuts over your entire body, the accumulation of all of those things would be traumatic on your body. And that's a kind of a similar analogy to what it's like to live with chronic trauma, or things like what could be dismissed in society as little are things that actually have a profound impact on us, especially the things that happen over and over and over. Because like Josh was saying earlier with childhood, these are things that stick with us over time. And they do something unique in our body where it creates a neural pathway in our brain that associates that particular event with a certain response. And if you have a similar type event, you get a new boss, and that new boss is also a jerk, then my brain is going to automatically respond in a similar kind. And so I think that that really acknowledging it's possible that everyone has trauma to work through on their journey. But more importantly than labeling that is to acknowledge that we have these significant life events that we might need help from somebody else to walk through those things. And there's some really beautiful ways that we can let those things go and let it move out of our body. I've seen so much healing happen in that area that I could get really emotional right now just thinking about the things that my clients felt like, this is forever for me. I will always feel this way. And having this moment where the brightness in their eyes is like comes back and through something that we're doing in the room. And they're like, I don't feel that anymore in my body. It's like discharged itself out of, and it's possible. And so I just want to offer that as an encouragement that like, even if saying I have trauma is like totally inaccessible, that's totally fine. Can we acknowledge that there's something significant that's happened that is hard for me to let go of, that matters? And let's talk about why that matters and why it's stuck, and figure out kind of an approach to getting it unstuck.
And I loved how you defined it so simply of like when when we experience overwhelm, that wasn't by our choosing. I love that definition. I feel like it simplifies things and allows us to have permission to be like, oh, maybe that did have some sort of hold on me. Or you're right, I have been thinking about that for a while. What might like bringing that to the surface do?
I feel like if you find yourself saying or thinking to yourself like, that reminds me of often, and it's the same thing that reminds you that it might be worth noticing, like, oh, I keep getting reminded of this particular thing. I keep remembering this particular thing. I can't stop thinking about this particular thing. Maybe it might be in specific contexts, but if you notice something like that, it's good to just kind of put a little flag on it and be like, maybe I should think about that a little more, or talk to somebody. Yeah.
It's like the engine light of a car coming on, right?
Yeah,
it's like
the car analogy's
yeah,
back.
exactly. It's like, oh, that's a little bit of a warning of like, there's something internally that's happening. That's actually such a good transition to our next question, and that's, what does it look like to walk alongside someone who is struggling with their mental health? How can I help?
Yeah, I love what we're talking about right now, because even with trauma, just the brain. We're learning about how the brain stores things. We're learning about how we actually get stuck. We're learning about why we repeat behaviors. And when I meet with people who are struggling with something with mental health, first of all, there's almost always a sense of shame about that, like I've failed. I did something wrong here. And I think honestly, there's a Christian thinker I listen to, and he says, being depressed is bad. Being depressed as a Christian is a little taste of hell. And he was talking about his church. He said, because they don't know what depression is, right? And that's where I think the field is helping, in that it's teaching us like what the brain is doing in these moments. Right? When we feel anxious, what's happening? You're being totally flooded. Do you know that that's connected to your nervous system? Did you know your nervous system runs all the way through your body? Emotions are not just emotions. We know that anxiety actually runs through your gut, through your musculature, through your skeletal system. And your moments of anxiety is actually when you yourself are flooded. That system is turned on, and it's connected to so many different things. Your heart rate, your body temperature, the degree in which you have any blood in your frontal cortex and therefore can form cognitive thoughts. All of that's affected deeply. And so I want to say that first, that I think that there's a lot here just teaching us what is happening, so you can tell people this is something. When someone's depressed, and we learn it is depression, I actually think it's really helpful to be able to name it and say, this is depression. Do you know what that is? A total lack of desire, hopelessness, and lack of motivation. Yeah, this is something that's happening to you. Sure, there's probably a reason, but it's not just because of some personal failure that you need to pick yourself up and get up. And so I think there's a lot here from the brain, even in the research from trauma, that's teaching us what is really happening in your body, to tell you and give you an understanding that it's not just you. It's something that's happening to you, within you. But what was the question? Okay, struggling with their mental health. Woo! Yeah, somebody's struggling with their mental health. I think about this, and I think a lot of times when we sit with someone who's struggling, we feel super uncomfortable. We don't know what to do. We feel their distress. If you've ever sat with someone that has shared really hard news with you, or said, I've never shared this with anyone, or I don't know what to do, right? Or just sat with someone and they're actually in tears, right? Whatever's happening is hurting. What most often happens is it creates distress inside of us. Which is that in those moments, we usually feel obligated. We're like, how do I fix this? How do I say the right thing? How do I not hurt this person more, right? I think those are all really valid fears, right? You don't want to do bad in this situation. You feel the gravity, the weight of it, and you care about this person. But what that person needs most is actually just connection. And that'd be true if they were in a counseling office with an expert, by the way. The thing that they need most is connection. The word comfort in the scriptures, the actual word is forte. And forte literally means to be with, right? Comfort has a withness about it. And if you can actually demonstrate withness with people, it will do way more than if you were yet a PhD in depression. Which is that they need to know that somebody is actually in their experience with them, caring about them, and listening with curiosity. And I think that's the biggest thing, just to be honest, is having curiosity and kindness. That's the biggest thing they need for themselves in that moment, and that's what what we demonstrate for them, is you're asking questions. I often don't know, and sure, I'm a counselor, and I like training on maybe some questions to ask, but what I'm focused on is just being curious towards them. And I often talk about the difference between ministry and manipulation. Manipulation is, how can I get the response that I want out of you? I was trained in manipulation, right? And I'm not anti-biblical counseling. I'm still a part of a biblical counseling coalition. But I got to tell you, I was trained in that response. How can I get this person to say the right thing, have the right answer, have the biblical response? That is not helpful. That's manipulation 101. How can I, ministry instead, how can I genuinely love this person across from me? And that can look a lot of different ways, but my posture is, I want to genuinely love you. And I usually just ask questions. And if I don't know, I say, will you keep talking and just tell me more? I just want to hear what you're experiencing. I'm so glad to be with you in this moment. Wow, this sounds really hard. I'm trying to attune to what they're going through. Connection's huge, yeah. There's a therapist that we love. She's a therapist and she's a pastor at Redeemer Church. That's Tim Keller's church. And she helped us form the Reach Counseling Center here. But she talks about corrective relational experiences, which is in any given moment, I'm literally trying to be the face of God to people. And this is where I think this is way outside the counseling room. This is just you with your friends, you with people that you're going to come into contact with, you with your families. People and all of us have marred views of God based on how we've received him from other people. This is why your relationship with your mom and dad is so big. Those are the first people to show you, what does it mean? What does God's face mean towards me? What does somebody feel about my failures, my shortcomings, right? My embarrassing moments. All of those experiences lead you and me to have a real experience of who God is. And that's why so many Christians, when they become Christians, will say things like, I can't feel God's love. Or if they have shame, yeah, I know you're telling me it's covered, I'm forgiven, but I can't access that emotionally. Yeah? A lot of people can't enter into that. You know what they can though? If you're showing them. If you have skin and bones and you're putting compassion on that, I cannot tell you how much that will transform a person, even allowing them to love God. Because you are a person that can show them what Jesus did in person every time. You can interrupt me and I have compassion and I have care for you. And I have people that I sit with, and I think my only job with them sometimes, sit with a guy right now, is to delight in him. Because his whole life he's felt like a monster and a failure, and he's been through it. But when I sit with him and I say, I actually really like you, which isn't a lie. I actually delight in you. And he apologizes for taking up my time, and he apologizes. And I would love to spend time with you. I actually really enjoy you. A year later, I got to tell you, it has transformed him to know and believe, embodied in the form of a person. It's true that somebody doesn't condemn me. And so for you, that's true as well. And that's where connecting with people, just being available and caring and loving and curious with kindness. Don't give him the answer. You can seek Jesus together. He has answers, but he is the answer, and you can be him. And I think that's the best answer in most of these situations.
Yeah, I think that in that, like, you don't have to be the expert. You are your presence is enough. There's even research that shows that, like, the therapeutic relationship is one of the most determining factors in the success of therapy. Not all of the fancy things that we do with clients, but the relationship is the foundational factor. And so you don't have to be an expert by any means. You can be maybe resourced or have some things in your pocket in case somebody needs to call the suicide hotline, for example, or something like that. But I had a supervisor one time that said, Erin, I want you to remember this acronym. It's the word WAIT. Why am I talking? And because my tendency in my anxiety is to fill silence to make myself feel better. And when my clients or people that I love probably as well would be feeling emotions and being quiet and like reflective or crying or things like that, I would fill that silence with my own words because of my own discomfort. And my supervisor was like, very lovingly, but was like, please stop talking. Like, you aren't adding anything to that space. You're actually stealing from them in that moment. And you guys aren't therapists, but I think it's very applicable that we want to just, if we can just be like, tell me more. How can I support you in this moment? Sometimes that might be that they want resources and they need you to help them find that. And sometimes it might be, I just need someone to listen to me. And so being able to kind of be in that space with them and not feel the pressure. Because I guarantee you as well, they're not hoping that you feel the silence. They're not saying, please talk more while I'm feeling sad. Like, they actually just want you to sit with them. So your discomfort is only yours. And offering your silence to them, offering your compassion to them, a hand on their shoulder, I'm here with you. I know this is really hard. I'm so sorry that you're dealing with this. I'm not going anywhere. I'm right here. Those kinds of things can speak so much more than here's what I would do, because the here's what I would do usually falls pretty flat. Until they ask you, what would you do? Don't answer that question. So, yeah.
That's so good. I had a mentor that once told me predictability can be preventable. And so if you're the kind of person that is in those situations where you're like, oh my gosh, I know my tendency and I know that I'm just like, I want to fix their problem. I want to solve it and everything, kind of like what Loy was saying. There's even just like, if you ask a simple question like, hey, if your friend comes to you and they're like, hey, can I tell you about something? The thing that you can say is like, hey, do you want me to listen? do you want me to ask questions, or do you need advice or encouragement? And by you sharing that, that allows them to be able to also let you know what they need. And so if that's kind of like the way that you would go, maybe that would be a helpful practical tip. So we are going to transition into a time of Q&R, and it just so happens that one of our Q&R questions was also one of the questions that we had in our additional time, or additional questions based on time. And so that question is, how can I tell if something is spiritual warfare or if it's an emotional or mental health concern?
Yeah, I think it's I love this question. I used to work at a community psychiatric clinic, and which just means that I worked with actively schizophrenic adults who had been for most of their life. That was a really spiritual environment and also a really confusing environment, because schizophrenia is a very real thing that happens to the brain. And then I would show up with my clients and they'd tell me that they were seeing demons. What do I do in that moment? And that's a pretty extreme moment. That's probably not what it's like for most of you. To be honest, for me as a counselor, I think my answer is, it's really hard to tell. It's really hard to tell. Because some things present as really spiritual. I have a guy I meet with right now who is schizophrenic. I have a ton of compassion for him. I love him a ton. And he's spent a lot of time and energy thinking, what is God saying to me right now in this moment? And his brain puts him in pretty dark places, right? He feels deceived all the time. He hears lots of voices, including that maybe he hears the Holy Spirit's voice. But he's in a pretty rough place with that, right? I've actually had to start telling him, we need to stop asking that question. Like right now, trying to discern the secret will of God. Let's just open the Bible, right? Because he really gets stuck in those places. But either way, I think the answer B is that you treat both. You do both. So when someone has come to us with care requests at Reach Church and they're struggling with a really difficult issue, and there's a whole history behind it. Right? Like I've done this, or right? And we have a lot of people don't know this. We have an active ministry in Reach that is a deliverance ministry, which means what they're trained in is going through your past, asking, where have you had open doors spiritually? Where have things happened to you where maybe a dark spirit, right, was invited in, or got a foothold and now has been oppressing you? That's really the spiritual question, right? Is there real oppression? Because we know that the Bible says there is oppression of demons on people. That's a spiritual issue, right? So that ministry exists, and we've had people come with difficulties, and I've said, I really think you should do therapy, first of all, okay? Because we want to do everything we can with your mental state of mind, your emotions, and your body to fight what's happening. And can I have you go meet with Mike O'Neill, our elder, who's actually really good at walking people through structured prayer around bondage? So I think the answer is, I think it's really hard to tell, and I think it's do both. Yeah, and then I think the other thing, I think they overlap a lot, just to be honest. I think when the Bible says generational sin, I think we're constantly discovering what that is, right? I talked to you guys about how my dad would just explode. I love my dad. I feel like I could really depict my dad poorly here, right? He's a human, which is why he has very active flaws that actually have very actively hurt me, and I love him, right? So, but he would just explode, and he could not handle my distress. Guess what happens right now when my 10-year-old son gets angry? What it does inside me. I, by default, get enraged. My first feeling is, how dare you? And I'm distressed. My whole body almost cannot hold the anxiety of seeing him get distressed and angry. And as I reflect on that, I just know I'm staring at the exact sin of my dad in me. And guess what? I know neurobiologically, that's in my body, because no parent showed me, how will I regulate my own distress? Dad, will you show me I'm upset? He explodes. I learned through repetition, this is how you regulate anger and discomfort, right? And that's why it comes out of me automatically towards my son. So I just say that to say, generational sin, I think that's a spiritual issue that involves, like demons and lies and the enemy wanting to lie to you actively. I also think generational sin is something that is psychological and emotional and in our bodies that I'm actively trying to repent of in every way I can. So I think you use both. You do both. Yeah.
I also think that you touched on this, but like pursuing all of the avenues, I think there's no harm in, I would often tell my counseling clients, like, let's get your blood work done. Let's see what your body is doing. Let's explore that. if that's not the case, that's the source, then we've checked kind of that corner, so to speak. Let's talk about like, what's it like for you with this particular thing that you're wondering about, that you're struggling with? What's the history in that area? What does that look like? Like Josh was talking about, do you have history with a family member? And let's talk about spiritually. Like, let's ask the Lord, where is this coming from? What is this about? Because God promises in his word that if we ask for wisdom, he gives it abundantly. Gives it abundantly without, like, not begrudgingly. So he's not going, fine, I'll give you wisdom. He's going, here, have some more and some more. And so when we ask him for that, we can approach everything from all of those avenues and see what comes up. And from there is kind of how we go, okay, what's our plan of action? What can we pursue? If I feel like when I pray about it, God is just really showing me that there's this hook that happened because of something that I was exposed to or something like that, and he wants me to pray through that, I really believe that he will reveal that to us. And I also think that there are real biological imbalances that we experience. And there's no shame in it being either one of those things. And there's no shame in it being both of those things. We all have, the enemy wants to use whatever he can to steal, kill, and destroy. That's his MO. And so if I have a biological imbalance, he's going to stir that pot until it's overflowing. If I have a spiritual foothold in my family line or in me personally, he's going to stir that. If I have emotional experiences where my dad blew up at me or my mom was hypercritical or whatever, he's going to stir that. He's going to use it all. And so just like with the trauma question earlier, sometimes it's less helpful to label it because we get fixated, kind of what you were saying with your client of like, what is God saying to me right now? Like we get so fixated on the objective that we are missing what God wants to do in us in that area. And so I think it's a very important question of it being spiritual warfare or not. But I think if we kind of go in all of the realms of like emotional, physical, and spiritual and just explore with curiosity and not a sense of like hyper urgency of like, it must be this or it must be this, but more just maybe it's this. Maybe it's all of these things. Maybe it's two of these or one of these or whatever, a combination. When we can approach it in that way, I think that God can really do a huge work in us. Because at the end of the day, not to gloss it, but it's all spiritual, right? Like we're in a broken world. So the enemy is going to be like, whatever way I can kick this person, I'm going to figure it out. And so if we can explore all of those avenues, we can see just what things kind of come up.
Yeah, that's so good. I really want to get to at least like 3 of these questions. So can we do like a rapid fire round? And this is, again, take it with a grain of salt, but like let our answers be brief and also let there be many questions after. Okay, so the first question is, what wisdom and hope can you give to people who have had bad experiences with therapy or feel like it didn't work? Is it supposed to work the first time?
Oh, man. Wow. Really fast. Not all counselors are created equal. I'm going to say that first of all. I'm a person who has trained counselors. I also know who I was when I began as a counselor. Ooh, hard shudder. Right? So I know excellent therapists now, and I'm blown away at how many counselors I've met where I'm like, I wouldn't let anyone sit with you. And I say that with a lot of compassion and someone who loves our field, okay? So I think there's that. I think finding like a list, and I think fit's a real thing. Right? What works for one person doesn't for another person. I've had clients who have really excelled with me, and I've had clients who are like, you are not what I was looking for, and that's okay, you know? So I think that's it.
Yeah, I would say like it's okay, kind of keep a check on your motives, because if someone presses on something and you're like, oh, they're not a good fit for me, that might actually be you. But then also...
A word.
But also like, honestly, it took me 4 different therapists to find the therapist that was a fit for me.
That's normal.
And if you put it out there that like, I really want to see if we're a good fit, so can we have a consultation call, or I would like to have a session with you, and knowing that it's okay if you go, hey, this isn't the right fit for me, that'll be okay. It'll be fine for you to kind of explore different ways. And the one other thing I would say too is if you can do a little bit of research, don't kind of go down the rabbit hole, but a little bit of research on some of the different trainings that there are out there, specifically for what you're looking for. So let's say you have trauma and you just really jive with people who can kind of sit compassionately with you, finding what are the ways that some therapists are trained for like compassionate trauma care and see what comes up. Or I'm looking for solutions in this particular area. So, okay, this is what kind of the trainings are. And then when you're on Psychology Today or places where you can find therapists, you can kind of narrow it down by specialty.
Awesome. And also on our resource list, we will send out therapists that we do recommend. I know that's half the battle of being like, how do I even know who's trustworthy? And I don't want to waste my time and money if we're being honest. And so we'll send out great resources. Again, take it with a grain of salt.
And you can ask too. If you're like, hey,
email us.
I found these 3 people. Do you know any of them? And what do you think? Like, we're happy to help.
That's awesome. How figured out, baggage unpacked, does one need to be before marrying? Can the desire to do the work end up becoming an unhealthy barrier
How
to
are
dating?
these fast questions?
Rapid fire round. I'm going to just say it one more time. How figured out, baggage unpacked, does one need to be before marrying? Can the desire to do the work end up becoming an unhealthy barrier to dating?
I'm sure it can be. I'm sure it can be. Yeah, and I think you just think about marriage, it literally is like you slowly become an expert on that person's brokenness, okay? And that person constantly reveals to you your brokenness, and that is happening in real time in my marriage, right? You don't just figure it out. So I think the way how you define marriage is huge with that, right? If you literally define marriage as 2 sinners, we're going to lay down our lives over and over again. And as I learn your faults, I'm going to keep showing you Jesus until we see him face to face. But that's never going to stop. That kind of marriage. I mean, that marriage can stand up and has in my office against the worst types of betrayal, the worst types of absolute atom bombs on a marriage, and have real healing and gentleness and softness and intimacy where there was so much pain, right? And I've had people who have not had any of that, and they can't stand each other, and they really despise each other, but also the expectation of marriage is this is supposed to feel good all the time, right? This is supposed to give me good feelings, or I'm supposed to receive from you. So I think how you define marriage actually frames that question, and what you're expecting coming into it. Like if we're gonna chisel away everything and then just fly into the sunset, it's like, yeah, there is some big disappointment on the road ahead of you, you know? But if you're like, I know this person's a sinner, we're gonna keep discovering that and have grace and learn how to do, it's like, yeah, you could face almost anything, so. But yeah, if you wanna try to figure it out, no. I mean, I got married at age 20, so I feel like, don't talk to me. Like, I couldn't even drink, and I was like, I do forever. And I do not prescribe that to people, because that didn't go well, but.
And I think that's real, where it's like, oh, how much do I have to figure out my stuff before I get married? But like, if you're even asking that question, why not just explore counseling? And half of like being married is, yes, you find out those things together, you work through those things together. But if you have language before you even enter into that, how much does that actually bless the person that you're with? And so I think that is something that we shouldn't underestimate. Okay, last question. Ooh, which one? There's so many good ones. Also, you can vote. So this is your chance to vote for one. Okay. Actually, let's do this one. This one's good. Too late.
Executive decision.
How do we support friends and family battling with mental health issues while establishing boundaries as Christians? Like, where do we end and the other person ends?
That's a good one. I love that one.
That is so good. First of all, you have to know what the boundaries are. You have to do your own work to know that. There's a really amazing book that I recommend that Kelsey will have, but just talking about like what are boundaries and how do I set them. And so I think that we look at where responsibility lies. And so when I'm talking with a person, when I have a family member who is struggling, I've walked through this personally, sharing with you now. Like I have family members who have called me and been like, you're a therapist, I would like to talk to you. And I'm like, oh crap. Like I'm not your therapist. I am a therapist. And so that's the responsibility piece, is when the responsibility, you can feel that they're putting it in your lap. I think that is where the responsibility line needs to be drawn, is that we can remain curious and let someone's struggle still remain their responsibility. We want to walk with them and journey with them and kind of discover for ourselves what that sacrifice looks like in relationship. We might be okay with, hey, call me at 2 a.m. if you need that. And we might not be okay with that. And so determining for yourself sort of what your boundaries are, but then also being able to kind of voice like, hey, I noticed that when we talk about this, you're often asking me what you should do. Do you think maybe we could discover a therapist that you could talk to? Because I actually don't really have all the answers or the resources. And so kind of really keeping in mind sort of what responsibility that person is maybe putting on you. And that the reality is when we're walking with somebody through mental health struggles, that is really uncomfortable for the most part. It's messy. It hurts. It hurts to see people that we love hurt. And so that's not necessarily bad that we feel that, the word says weep with those who weep and mourn with those who mourn, and that we get to comfort people with the comfort that we've received from the Lord. And so I think that is the good, healthy space when we're kind of journeying alongside with people. But when they try to take their stuff and put it in our lap so that we do that for them, that's kind of the boundary line that I think is really important to keep in mind. And you can figure that out through reading boundary books and things like that. You can also stay really attuned to what your body feels like when you're with them. Do I feel like I'm bracing myself every time I'm with this person? Do I feel like 10 million times worse and just completely bogged down after I've spoken with this person? I think there's a difference between feeling sorrow alongside someone and carrying a weight that isn't yours to carry. So
I totally disagree.
Boo.
I don't. I'm just joking. I just wanted to
I have a
disagree
boundary.
once.
I will not receive that.
Well, that was incredible, and there's so many other questions. Also, these questions are phenomenal. Thank you for sending them in. Part of me is also some of the really practical ones, someone who was asking what apps would you recommend on mindfulness, meditation, breath work. We will include that in the resource list. We'll try to include as many as possible. Maybe we jump on IG stories and share some answers to these questions at some point. Yeah.
I would love that.
Cool, down. Well, we are gonna turn to one another and just kind of unpack